Hello, I'm Carl Grossman. Here in New York City, in the building over there, the 92nd Street Y in Manhattan, there's been an absolutely super important conference today on the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster, nuclear power in general, and also the implications of the Fukushima disaster for nuclear power in the United States. The panelists, articulate, couldn't be more articulate, included the former Prime Minister, Naoto Kan of Japan. He was the Prime Minister during the beginnings, it's still going on, the beginnings of the Fukushima disaster. Gregory Jaczko, who was the chairman of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission at the time. Peter Bradford, who was a member of the NRC, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Arnie Gundersen, a nuclear engineer and an executive of a major company in the nuclear industry who has now become a major critic of nuclear power, and Ralph Nader, the legendary consumer activist, all speaking here at the 92nd Street Y today. Listen. Here's Paul Gallais. He's the president of Riverkeeper, and he moderates the program.
I am the Hudson Riverkeeper. We have a very distinguished group here to address you today on a topic of surpassing importance. And before we begin, before I make my introductions, we have a special bonus. We have a video prepared for us, especially by Mr. Jean-Michel Cousteau of Ocean Futures. And I'm going to ask the folks who are running the proceedings to please show the video.
I'm Jean-Michel Cousteau. I'm honored to have a chance to offer my thoughts on the critical issue of nuclear power in New York and Boston. I regret that, due to prior commitments, I cannot be with you in person. My initial introduction to the ocean by my father, Jacques Cousteau, impressed upon me some important facts about our planet. These were: we live on a planet bathed in two fluids, the ocean and the atmosphere. These fluids are in constant motion, each interacting with the other and each reaching every corner of the planet. Because of these facts, nothing can be thrown away because there is no away. Everything is connected, and whatever pollutant is released anywhere on the planet has the potential to have impacts everywhere. I believe these facts are particularly relevant to the discussion about nuclear power. Human arrogance and error are part of reality, as are natural disasters totally out of our control. This means that it is absolutely certain that there will be unpredictable events capable of upsetting the best of our human engineered enterprises. In the case of a power, human error and natural disaster may topple a wind generator, damage a photovoltaic panels, and even destroy a petroleum-based power plant. But the consequences of these will be microscopic compared to the impact of a nuclear power plant going down. This has been proven true with the Fukushima and Chernobyl catastrophes. Those who choose to ignore the past are doomed to repeat it. I urge you to learn from Fukushima and Chernobyl so we don't have to see these catastrophes repeated. I applaud all of you for addressing the important issue of nuclear power plant and trust you will think of your children and all future generations to come as you make important policy decisions. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you and hope that great decisions can be made for the future of our species.
Before I begin some introductory remarks, I want you all to join me in thanking the organizer of today's session, the Samuel Lawrence Foundation. Thank you very much. I also want to recognize groups too numerous to mention who were involved in the planning of this exercise. This is an extremely capable, dedicated, wise group of activists we have working on the issues associated with Fukushima, Indian Point, Oyster Creek, and all the other nuclear facilities in this country. Again, my organization is Hudson River Keeper. Hudson River Keeper was formed 46 years ago to protect the Hudson River, and since then we've broadened our mission to involve protecting the drinking water supply for 9 million New Yorkers, a drinking water supply that would be very severely compromised in any accident involving Indian Point. We've been focusing on the Indian Point issue because of its impacts on marine populations for decades. But in the wake of 9/11, we realized that we're not only in it to protect the fish, there's a very serious risk to the people of this region from nuclear energy at Indian Point. And so we've dedicated ourselves to opposing the relicensing of Indian Point, which I believe is why I'm here this morning as the moderator. But today's panel is why we're really here. It's an extraordinary group of people. Together, these men are perhaps the most experienced, authoritative voices imaginable on one of the most important topics any of us confronts at present, the Fukushima disaster and its implications for New York. These men understand the poorly lit corners where engineering, science, and plant operations, regulatory activity, and disaster relief come together, or don't come together, as the case may be. Those who are former public officials have had access to the briefings that those of us in the audience will never see. They've talked with the experts in the context of these severe disasters, and they are going to bring us information that we would otherwise never have an opportunity to hear. So this is a wonderful opportunity for us all. Now, at this point, I think that it is my great pleasure to introduce our very first speaker, former Prime Minister of Japan, Naoto Kan. In 2011, Mr. Kan was Japan's Prime Minister during the Fukushima nuclear disaster. At one point, facing a situation where there was a chance that people might not be able to live in the capital zone, including Tokyo, and would have to evacuate. Mr. Kan declared the need for Japan to end its reliance on atomic power and promote renewable sources of energy, such as solar, that have long taken a back seat in the resource-poor country of Japan's energy mix. Mr. Kan resigned as Prime Minister in August 2011 and now serves the Democratic Party of Japan to garner support for alternative energy policies.
Naoto Kan, who's the former Prime Minister of Japan, and as he says during this event, he was supportive of nuclear power up until the Fukushima disaster and now has become an advocate in Japan, around the world, for safe, clean, renewable energy.
Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Naoto Kan.
Before I start my speech, I'd like to thank people here in the United States and people in Japan. So, in the aftermath of the great earthquake in Japan in the year 2011 and the subsequent nuclear disaster, we have received a lot of support from people around the world. I feel quite honored to be here by the invitation of people who are trying to work on the issues of Indian Point nuclear power plant.
せっかくの機会ですので、福島原発事故
I'd like to take this opportunity to talk a little more in depth about the first 2 days of the accident.
当時のことをお伝えしたいと思います。
The great earthquake occurred at 2:46 p.m. of March 11th, 2011.
最初に
The first report that I received after the earthquake was that all the reactors in Japan, all the reactors safely shut down, and that greatly relieved me.
しかしそれから1時間
But shortly after the initial report, I received another one that said that I'm assuming he's talking about Fukushima, at Fukushima Daiichi site, they have reactors lost the external power, and also as a consequence, they have lost the cooling capacity. And Prime Minister had some knowledge about the nuclear technology, and he realized that this could lead to serious catastrophe, and a chill ran in his spine. Even the night of the 11th, the report was that they still had some water left in the pressure vessel, including the reactor number 1. But today, we know that just 5 hours after the earthquake, like 8 p.m. of that evening, at the number 1 reactor, there was the water had evaporated, and there was a melt-through breaking through the 2-centimeter thickness of the wall of pressure vessel, and that the molten fuel was basically going on the bottom of the vessel. And the molten, melted fuel basically on the bottom of the containment vessel was heating the concrete underneath. And it was on the verge of just the breaking through, and the radioactivity was about to go outside. Had that occurred, thank God it didn't, but nobody could go near, not including the reactor, not just the number 1 reactor, but near the Fukushima nuclear power plant site today. But fortunately, we were able to pour water into the number 1 reactor, and we were able to stop the development of further melting the bottom. However, the next day, on the 12th, in the afternoon, the reactor number 1 had the hydrogen explosion. And then on the 14th, March 14th, the reactor number 3 had hydrogen explosion also. On the morning of the 15th, early in the morning, like 6 a.m., when he actually went to the headquarters of Tokyo Electric Power Company, what was happening at the Fukushima Daiichi site was that the reactor number 2, the containment vessel broke and then reactor number 4 also had the hydrogen explosion. At the same, those two events occurred at the same time. So within 4 days, 3 of the 4 reactors had either meltdown or melt through, and 4 of them had hydrogen explosions. And there was no such severe accident, before, historically speaking. During those days, I just stayed at my office overnight and every night, and wearing those, the emergency response sort of a garb, and I just stayed there. What was going through my mind at the time? How far is this going? How worse is this going to get? And how can we stop this from getting worse? And how far do we have to evacuate people? How far are people going to be affected? And also, I was mindful of the report of Chernobyl accident that I had read. It was a severe accident at Chernobyl. However, they only had 1 reactor. However, at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, they had 6 reactors. And at the Fukushima Daini, which is 12 kilometers away, they had 4. So altogether, 10 reactors were closely situated. Also, spent fuel pools, including Daiichi and Daini, there are altogether 11 of them. I realized that if all those 10 reactors with 11 spent fuel pools altogether, if we cannot control them, then we're going to have a radiation leak into the atmosphere, worse, maybe 10 times, even 100 times worse that of a Chernobyl accident. And I fear that in that foreseeable, there is a possibility that the area, including Tokyo, might be affected. We might have to evacuate so many people. I tasked the commissioner of Atomic Energy Commission, Mr. Kondo, to come up with a simulation of the worst-case scenario. His worst-case scenario report that came back a few days later basically confirmed my worst fear, which was having to evacuate up to 250-kilometer radius of the reactors, and that has something like 50 million people. So the next day of the earthquake, the United States and the government and the embassies, the basic State Department, they told the citizens to evacuate from within 50-mile radius. I understand that the Indian Point nuclear power plant is located 50 miles from New York City, and so that's well within 50 miles radius. And in that, if something happens there, then 20 million people will have to evacuate. The cause of this catastrophe, of course, is the earthquake and the tsunami. But additionally, the fact that we were not prepared, we did not anticipate such a huge natural disaster could happen, and we were not prepared for it. That was also the cause. In the United States, after the 9/11, there was a certain security measure taken to safeguard the nuclear power plants against terrorism. But in Japan, we did not feel that there would be such a terrorism that we have to worry about. So we weren't even prepared for that either. As it was shown in the video earlier, today the contaminated water into leaking into the ocean. That is a big concern. The original topography of the Fukushima Daiichi site was that it was like a 35-meter high cliff. However, Tokyo Electric Power Company did not want to spend the money to pump the water 35-meter high, the cooling water. So what they chose to do was to basically level the, scrape the cliff up to like a 10-meter from the sea level. And then that's where the 6 reactors were constructed. So what that ended up doing was that that place had plenty of groundwater to begin with, but by lowering the ground level, basically the groundwater is running right underneath those reactors. So our concern today is that the radioactive particles from those broken reactors are now mixed in with the groundwater, and some of that is leaching into the ocean.
私自身、3.11 の
My position before March 11th, 2011, was that as long as we make sure that the safety, it's safely operated, nuclear power plant can be operated and should be operated. However, after experiencing the disaster of March 11th, I changed my thinking 180 degrees completely. We do have accidents such as airplane crash and so on, and sometimes hundreds of people die in an accident. But there is no other accident or disaster that would affect 50 million people, maybe a war, but there is no other accident can cause such a tragedy. If we had a situation where by stopping, by not utilizing nuclear power plants at all, if that happens, then maybe just so many people would starve to death or something like. If we had a situation like that, that's one thing. But what we have seen in Japan today is that, even without nuclear power plants, we can actually supply energy to meet our demands. The last thing I did as a prime minister before I left the office was to establish the feed-in tariff system in order to encourage the more renewable energy production generation. What happened was that in 1 year after the feed-in tariff was installed, Japan increased the capacity of solar power generation equivalent of 3 nuclear reactors. People are also experimenting with the floating wind power generator off the coast of Fukushima today. If this experiment is successful, then we might see, per one unit, you can create 7,000 kilowatts of electricity, and we could have 140 of them. Germany has set a goal of eliminating all nuclear power by 2022, and also by 2050, they're trying to not rely on any fossil fuel for power. And so all the power will be supplied by renewable energy. That is their goal today. I'm not sure about the acronym, but IPCC, as an international, I guess, a global organization, has reported that global warming not only affects the sea level, seawater rising, but also it's projecting that it would increase the intensity of hurricanes, typhoons, and tornadoes.
私も世界各
I have visited a lot of examples in the world of renewable energy. And if humanity really work together and develop all the potential for renewable energy, we will not have to rely on any, we can generate all our electricity through renewable energy. I firmly believe that.
最後に、
In conclusion, I'd like to talk a little bit about in the past several months. In June this year, I was in San Onofre and visiting the San Onofre nuclear power plant area and participating in symposium just like this. And it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to receive the news that the San Onofre nuclear power plant is going to shut down permanently. In September, I traveled to Taiwan. There's a women's group, especially leading the sort of a fight against the creation of the number 4 nuclear power plant or reactor there. And that would be situated only 9 kilometers from its capital of Taipei. And also in September, with Dr. Yatsuko here, we were at the Ikata nuclear power plant in western part of Japan, and we participated in symposium there, and just met with the people in the community who are trying to shut it down. And quite recently, the former Prime Minister Koizumi, I think he was in the office in the early part of 2000s. He's still quite popular today in Japan, and he actually announced that made a statement that he opposes nuclear power now after visiting Onkalo in Finland, which is the permanent nuclear depository.
小泉元首相は
Interestingly, former Prime Minister Koizumi has a lot of influence over current Prime Minister Abe. So how is this going to play out in the politics in the near future? That's going to be very interesting.
最後に一言だけ付け加え
And lastly, I'd like to say this.
原発事故を技術的にゼロにするという
Technically, it is impossible to eliminate nuclear power plant accident.
原発事故を
There's only one way to eliminate accident, which is to get rid of all nuclear power plant. And that has to be done by the will of people.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I know these were speeches, presentations, but what speeches, what presentations on the most important of issues, the lethal dangers of nuclear power. Thank you for watching.
More people out of the industry, out of the NRC, out of the Department of Energy, basically saying there's a better way, there's a safer way, there's a more environmentally benign way, there's a more respectful way for the land and for our descendants, if only to keep our descendants from cursing us.